as a child. What are some of the earliest memories you have from growing up in rural Pike County outside of Troy?
I remember as a young child growing up on that farm in Alabama, Pike County, 10 miles from Troy, working in the field, going to the field when I was not even old enough to go or to work. But my mother and father would take us as young children to the field when they were working, and they would place us on a shade tree or put us in a basket. And when we got old enough, we would pick cotton, gather peanuts, shake, pull corn. We would help plow the field, chop the cotton, pull up the weeds, the grass.
How old were you when you actually had to start working?
Well, I was about 6 years old when I first started working in the field, helping to pick cotton, helping to shake the peanuts, and put on my coveralls and my old shoes and a sun hat.
Talk about school for a little bit. I know in your book you talk about having to sneak to school a lot of times.
Well, on occasion, my mother and father wanted us to stay home and help gather their crops, or work in the field, gather the peanuts, pick the cotton. And some days I would get up very early, get my book bag, and get dressed, and hide under the porch and wait for the school bus to come up the hill. And I could tell the sound of the school bus. And the moment I heard that bus coming up the hill, I would run out, cross the road, and wait to get on that bus and go to school.
Did you get in trouble for that?
I did get in trouble from time to time, but I didn't know anything about the concept, but I was very daring, in a sense, and courageous, in one sense, to go against the wishes of my mother and father. But somehow it was embedded in me that education was so important. An uncle of mine, one of my mother's youngest brothers, had encouraged me to go to school, get an education. And at an early age, I saw education as the key, as the way out. It was my ticket. And I was determined to go to school. I had a teacher who was a librarian, but she was a teacher, one of my early homeroom teachers. And she would say, "Read, my child, read, my child." And I tried to read everything. We had very few books at home, but I tried to read everything. Every newspaper, every magazine, every little book that I could find.
How were you able to get a hold of a lot of your reading materials? Because I know you obviously couldn't get a library card then.
Well, we couldn't get a library card, but from time to time, an uncle, a teacher, my grandfather would provide us with a book or a newspaper. We were so poor, we didn't have a subscription to the Montgomery Advertiser, but my grandfather had one. And each day when he would finish reading his newspaper, we would get a copy of his newspaper.
So you'd get it a day old, you'd get the newspaper.
It was after he read it.
Right.
It was a day old.
Right.
But it kept me informed of what was going on, not just in Alabama, but around the country and around the world. And I listened. I listened to the radio. I listened to the radio to current events. And we, growing up, we didn't have a great deal of entertainment. But on a Saturday night, we listened to the Grand Ole Opry. And on Sunday afternoon, we heard the gospel music.
Now, obviously, throughout Black history, the church has played a central role in the community. What do you remember from your life in the church growing up?
Well, as a young child, I went to Sunday school every Sunday, and one church that where we were member was a Macedonian Baptist church. It only had service on the third Sunday, so I went there every third Sunday. Then some of my cousins, first cousin, and my aunt was a member of a little Methodist church a short distance from my house, and we went there on a first Sunday. And then the second and fourth Sunday, we would visit other churches.
But you were going to be on church on Sunday.
Oh, you had to go. It was a duty. It was like an obligation. You had to be in somebody's Sunday school every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock. And we didn't go to what you might call to hear a minister preach every Sunday, because some Sunday we didn't go on the fourth, on the second. But at least we went to Sunday school every Sunday at somebody's church. Church was sometimes you stay all day. It was like a happening. You go to a service in the afternoon, then you may go back to some service at night.
Well, yeah, it's obviously a hard life growing up, starting work when you're 6 years old, working from sun up, sundown. Was church an escape?
Church was a time that you can sort of relax, refresh, and get the energy and the inspiration for the week.
Obviously, you grew up in the country. What are some of the first memories you have of times when you would go, I imagine, with your parents into town, into Troy or Montgomery?
I do recall that at an early age going to Troy, and there was a drugstore there that still exists today.
On the Square Birds?
It's on the Square Bird.
Yeah.
And I saw it just a few weeks ago. It looked the same way a few weeks ago as it did when I was growing up as a child. It's a very historic place and building. I remember that we could go in there, into the store, and get what we call a combination. It was nothing but soda, syrup, and water. And they would call like Coca-Cola a combination. But we couldn't sit at the lunch counter. We had to come outside to drink it. Or we could go in and get an ice cream cone. But you couldn't take a seat at the lunch counter.
When was, and how old were you when you were first doing this?
Oh, probably 8, 9 years old.
So, probably that early, it wouldn't have occurred to you just the injustice of that. But when
well, it was not much longer. We would go to the theater.
Right.
A short distance from the drugstore.
Sure.
And I saw the signs saying white and colored. And I noticed all of the little white children were downstairs.
Right.
And all of the black children were upstairs. And the sign was pointing. You had to go up a flight of stairs to be seated in the balcony. And that's when I started asking my mother and father and grandparents and great-grandparents.
And you'd have been about 10 then, you said?
About probably 10, 11. Because in 1951, at the age of 11, I left the South for the first time. I traveled to Buffalo with my uncle and aunt and some of my first cousins in a car. And I recall very well, 2 or 3 days before we left, my mother baking all of these cakes and frying all of this chicken and wrapping it in cellophane paper, because we didn't have, I guess it was wax paper. And then put it in brown paper bags, in shoe boxes, that we could eat on our way from Troy to Buffalo. Because you couldn't stop in any place in Alabama or in Tennessee or Kentucky. And that's what we had to eat. But my uncles knew the places maybe that you could use the restroom because they had traveled that way so many times before. But when I got to Buffalo, I didn't see any sign saying white and colored. I saw black and white people using the same facilities. There wasn't any restroom marked white or colored, or white men, colored men, white women.
I know you've been back home recently, unfortunately, because of your brother, which I was sorry to hear.
Thank you.
But on a positive note, when you go back to Troy now, when you go back to South Alabama now, how does it make you feel to see just, not, of course, still has way to go, but just to see how far it's come?
Oh, when I go back, and I was back there very recently, and one day, it just brought tears to my eyes. There was this school bus coming down the same road that I took as a middle school student, as a high school student. My bus was an old broken down bus, all black children. But on this bus, the road now is paved, but there was a dirt road where these little kids got off, and they were black and white. They were holding hands, running and jumping with their books. I never saw anything like that in the 40s, the 50s, outside of Troy in Pike County, Alabama. And when I go back there now, I was on the campus of Troy State for a wedding reception back in June. And young people walked up and said, "You're John Lewis." And you go to the grocery store and white people, black people say, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you." And they want to give you a hug. The black people, the white, the black men and women. It's this sense of saying, "I'm sorry for what you went through." Your tribute, you honor the state of Alabama. Thank you for what you're doing. That makes you feel good.
Thank you for your time.
No, thank you, sir.
I know you've got other people.